Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Podcast powered by First National. I'm Aaron Cameron. Of course, with me is Adam Pawatic, recording live here at the Western Canada Apartment Investment Conference in Edmonton. Our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Trevor Casey at Inchikai Developments. Trevor, welcome to join. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Trevor, thanks for joining us. Why don't we just start with your background and how you got involved in real estate?
Thank you very much for having me, guys, for having me on. A little bit about myself. Born and raised in Metro Vancouver. I went to the University of British Columbia, where I did my Bachelor of Commerce, studied economics and real estate economics. I'm a member of the Skidegate First Nation. That's kind of how I knew when I was in university I wanted to work with First Nations or Indigenous communities, if possible. At the same time, Vancouver has a fast growing and kind of the real estate industry there has taken off over the last few decades. Coming out of school, I worked in the nonprofit sector briefly, and from there I got in touch with BC Housing. BC Housing is the Crown Corporation for British Columbia affordable housing. They pump out about 5,500 units a year. I think it's I think it is the largest developer in BC. So it's a really good place to learn. You kind of get your hands on various different types of projects and really just a lot of exposure. So I was there for about 4 years. And then about a little over 18 months ago, I joined Inchikai Development Corporation. Inchikai is the Squamish First Nations economic development arm. It's the sole shareholder of Inchikai is the Squamish First Nation. The purpose of the development corporation is to create wealth and prosperity for Squamish Nation members and for future generations. Real estate development is historically an industry that kind of has taken off in Vancouver, like I said, over the last few decades. So the First Nations at the table, specifically there in Vancouver, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh have taken note of this and really wanted to capitalize and help generate prosperity for their membership by getting in and getting a piece of the pie on real estate development. So Inchikai was founded in 2018 and then derailed slightly by COVID. But coming out of it, they started staffing up in kind of 2022. So I joined the organization at the start of 2023, primarily to work on the Sanok development.
So we'll get into the Sanok development because you're a development manager for that project and you're kind of boots on the ground and it's 11 towers. I think you said 11 million square feet.
4 million square feet.
4 million square feet.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So a giant development, and we'll talk about that. But let's work backwards. You mentioned, First Nations looking to get a piece of the pie. Maybe just give us, for those listeners that, I think those of us from BC have a little bit more, familiarity with it, but it's not that common in other parts of the country. So maybe just explain what's transpired over the last multiple decades to put First Nations in the position to start taking advantage of having the land and participating in the development.
Yeah, so I think historically speaking, a lot of First Nations communities, their involvement in any form of industry, whether it's real estate development, whether it's a natural resource project, it's just typically been through long-term land lease or revenue sharing agreements. That sort of agreement, whether it's specifically on reserve land, which the nation has the jurisdiction over, or if it's on their traditional territory or that sort of combination. Historically, it's just been through a long-term lease. I know for the Squamish First Nation, they have various leases throughout the Squamish Valley and the North Shore, where it tends to be an industry partner approached, and the federal government approves whether it's a 60-year, 100-year, whatever, 120-year lease, where the developer comes in and it's essentially their project for the next 120 years. They'll pay a nominal fee in rent, and that's kind of the way it goes. There's no opportunities for the nation to kind of showcase their land or be at the table and be involved in the development. They just negotiate the lease up front. And the thing is even more recently, those leases, I would say, have been more accurate to market, whereas you go back, like kind of getting into the history of this country and the darker side of it, those leases weren't always in the best picture for the First Nation. They weren't always being compensated for highest and best use.
Adequately, yeah.
Exactly. So that's kind of the going all the way back to where you would kind of look at how partnerships first were done, getting to where we're at today, where not only is it seeing leases for highest and best use or even profit sharing agreements, but you're seeing First Nations actually be like an equity partner in the development. You're seeing them getting a proceed and a say in how the development's going to play out, knowing that it's going to be on their land for 120 years in some cases.
And so under that structure, I mean, obviously it's got its pros and cons, especially if you're talking about deals done in the past that were, not at market. In an instance like that, is the main benefit not realized until the 100 years is expired on the lease? Is that the kind of downside of that structure?
Yeah, I think going back like a prime example in Vancouver, and it's not super media attention, but like you go look at like on Musqueam First Nations reserve land, there's a golf and country club built on it, and they're getting a lease payment that's assuming that land can only be used as a golf course. They're not getting a lease payment based on market rental for the 400 acres of that land. So that's a lease, I think, that goes back nearly 100 years, and it's coming due very soon. And there's no way that would be negotiated the same way in 2024 as it was however many years ago. So I think that's kind of the shortfalls that you've seen in the past, where First Nations communities, whether it wasn't access, maybe they didn't have access to the right legal counsel, the right support teams, or creating an economic development corporation that's staffed up to be able to adequately negotiate these leases. That's just one example of, I'd say, the many you'll see that were kind of tended to be favored towards industry, not the First Nations partner. And even once upon a time, there was a point where the federal government would have someone come out who was known as like the Indian agent, and they would negotiate on behalf of the First Nation. So I'd say it's come a long ways. There's still a lot of work to be done, but definitely with the larger First Nations closer to urban centers where they have more access to these access to capital, have more access to
more
staffing.
sophistication, it sounds like, right?
Exactly.
And so when did the sort of equity participation really start to take hold?
I think just because there's 630 different First Nations groups across Canada, it's such, like you said, the level of sophistication and kind of where they're at in their history, it ranges all across the board. But definitely, I would say the like looking at Vancouver specific, people are much more familiar with the current landscape. Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh have been doing development partnerships with developers now for well over a decade. I mean, you look at like Tsawwassen First Nation, the building like strip malls, like there's a lot more sophistication out of the larger First Nations located near urban centers.
And are they sharing information, sharing resources, sharing just knowledge to help everybody? Like it's sort of their camaraderie to work together.
Absolutely, yes. Specifically, I can comment on this because I was involved in the tour, but we gave Musqueam Capital Corp a tour of the Sanok development. Vice versa, they've recently given us a tour of their development they have going on out near University of British Columbia. So I would say there is quite a bit of, outside of the regular kind of conference series and schedules that everyone looks forward to, there is a lot of connecting and kind of growth and lessons learned and kind of which legal did you use to navigate through a certain issue, that those types of aspects.
No more Indian agent.
That's again, it seems ridiculous to think of, especially because a lot of times, like an Indian agent historically, that might have been like an ex-executive for the company that was now going to be negotiating the lease. So it really was a backwards system if you go back long enough.
God.
But yeah, it's the history of this country. There's no
you
there's
can't
no
ignore it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Oh.
Yeah.
So then in the evolution of the structuring, obviously lopsided deals, I guess, was, we'll call that phase one. More recently, there was deals priced to market on a long-term land lease basis, but no real active participation in the equity component. What's your opinion of that, of like a more recently done lease structure that I guess was priced to market?
Again, I think as long as it's priced to market and you're really, whether it's the council of the First Nation or the economic development arm that negotiated, whether it's government or the business arm, as long as they're driving return for their constituents, for their nation members, if that was the best decision for them, they're elected council members. Like that's what membership put them in place to do. And if they're driving the best market return for their people, and that's what was ultimately the decision being made, then I think there's nothing wrong with that. Any lease would have to go through a land designation process. We had to go through one at Sanok where membership had to vote on approving that lease. So again, I think getting a lot of transparency in the deal, making sure that it's the best case for the nation in that sense. I don't see anything wrong with it. I think if you were to look at it purely from like a financial aspect, if the nation if the nation can achieve a higher rate of return than what that lease payment is, then I would say it's the better option for them. If they don't have the ability to drive the development on that plot of land and create more wealth than what the lease is going to register, I think they'd be doing a disservice to their constituents if they were, taking it up themselves when they didn't have the ability to meet the monetary.
You almost
rate
have to
of
look at it
those.
like a for-profit organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what
Yeah.
were the naysayers? I assume there'd be naysayers, in a large group of people you're going to have, for and against. What would the naysayers say against a market-priced, land lease? Why would they vote against it?
I think it'd be a whole range of different things. And I think getting more into the political side of it, where maybe they wanted, housing for nation members. Maybe they wanted like amenities for nation members. Maybe they wanted a school for I think it's more of those aspects. It's not so much of getting into the nit and gritty on the business terms. I'm sure there could be people that think that better could always be achieved.
It's
but
probably more traditionalist.
Exactly. Yeah. Or a lack of something in community X. And that's where they think it should be. That's what they think the land should be used for instead.
Well, let's talk about Sanok. So maybe we just do the land history first before we get into the details of the development.
So the Sanok Reserve is located just off the downtown peninsula in Vancouver. It's just over the Broad Street Bridge, surrounded kind of by Kitsilano. The Sanok Reserve, going back to the 1800s, the entire Kits Point, there's hundreds of acres, was all the Sanok Indian Reservation. That's what existed. And then throughout history, more and more land was taken for kind of major infrastructure projects. So starting with the railway that connecting downtown to the city of Vancouver proper, starting with the Broad Street Bridge. When the First World War happened, Department of National Defense, there was more and more seizures of the land was taken from the nation. Ultimately, the entire reserve was taken, and in the early 1900s, the existing residents on that land were put on barges and shipped over to the North Shore, where there was other reserves for the Squamish First Nation. The land was taken from the federal government. Ultimately, it was kind of parceled out and sold off. And then fast forward to, I think it was around the 90s when it was CP Rail was selling a remainder portion. It was a 10.5 acre portion. The nation caught wind of this, and it was a lengthy legal process where the nation won the land back in 2003 with a monetary settlement for the previous size of the reserve that they didn't get back, because a lot of it was owned by private landlords now. So 2003 is when the nation got the land back. It went for a land designation in the early 2000s, and that was actually voted down. So like we talked about earlier, where you need for a land designation process to happen, in order for the federal government to grant a lease on that land, because reserve lands are federal lands, you need a 50% pass rate from nation members voting. So it was unsuccessful the first time through. And then fast forward to 2018, where a land designation went through with a historic, I think it was an 87% success rate for membership for the Sanok development that we're seeing and realizing nowadays.
What was the big difference in the two propositions?
To be honest,
Just sentiment.
And I wasn't there for either of them. Like I said, I joined the project after. I think the second time around, it was done in a strategic manner where the partnership wasn't formalized 100% between the Squamish Nation and West Bank Development, but it was on the way enough where pre-development work had been done and people could realize and see the potential for the land. They could realize the economic opportunity and what that could bring for the nation long term. And like I was talking about, typically when people vote no on a land designation, it's a lot of the times they have other concerns. They were able to see the long-term proceeds and how the nation can be much more closer to independence with long-term cash flows from a project like Sanok. So I think that was a big part of what this project could bring for the Squamish people.
How many members?
So the members, I believe it's about 4,100 nation members nowadays. Yeah, very large first, and they have a vast, right up into the Squamish Valley, a vast amount of land holdings. Sanok is the most kind of urban reserve. They have 3 others on the North Shore, and then a lot of territory and land up in the Squamish Valley, kind of further up the coast. Yeah.
And the intention is to continue to develop some of that land as necessary?
Yes. So Sanok, like I said, is underway right now. We broke ground on the first phase, which is 3 towers, about 1,500 units in September of 2022. Our second phase, we're just commencing, kind of at this moment. That's another 4 towers, so total of 7 under construction. 6 will be residential, purpose-built rental, one of which is an office tower. It's only about 45,000 square feet, and really it's designed to support the people living at Sanok. It's
So less risk of other office developments that are just concluding now because you've got a built-in population coming to the site.
Exactly, yes. And again, also being financed through CMHC's RCFI program, there's limitations how much commercial you can have in your development, actually. So wanting to have the kind of standard retail along the ground floor, there is about, out of the 4 million square feet, about 250,000 of commercial retail. So there was no desire to put a massive office tower in the development anywhere. It was, like I said, enough to kind of support the people that would be there. And 6,000 units does bring, it's expected to have up to about 9 to 10,000 people on build out living at Sanok one day. So that should create adequate demand for whatever commercial or retail goes in there.
And what kind of retail are you you're marking for this?
I think all that's really been in the book, like discussions so far, has been the standard, like the immediate amenities needed on site. That's stuff like grocery, like food and beverage, like that type of retail, cafe, those kinds of things. I will say that Sanok, in terms of, we can get into more of the net zero aspect of it later on, but one of the big things at Sanok that we're trying to achieve in a net zero operational is a reduction on vehicle dependency, where we're achieving, I think it's about a 15% ratio of parking stalls to units at Sanok. So it's a big portion of it is bike dependency and transit kind of transportation.
There's buses going across the bridge on a regular basis, right?
Yes, and we're actually, through the partnership and the project, has committed to about $45 million of transit upgrades, which includes widening the Broad Street Bridge, putting in pullover lanes for bus, so it can really be an express bus route to support the added demand that Sanok is going to be bringing to the region.
So maybe let's just get into more details. So you said 11 towers, 6 are purpose-built apartments.
One more is going to be an office tower in the first 2 phases, and then the remaining phases 3 and 4 are just 2 towers each.
Condo.
Yeah. No. Purpose-built rental as well. Yes.
So how many units in total?
6,000 units total.
And is that, let's go through market, affordable, how are they being carved up?
So the first 2 phases are approved for financing through CMHC's RCFI program. The requirements of that are 80% market, 20% affordable. Out of the 20% affordable, 265 are being set aside for Squamish Nation members, and if they can't be leased to Squamish Nation members, Indigenous people. So that's the first 2 phases. The phases 3 and 4 are envisioned to be the same. There is the opportunity to look at leasehold strata. The nation would never want to sell in perpetuity. They'd want to sell for 100, 120 years, knowing that the land will be theirs going forward. But right now, the way just the market landscape is looking at Vancouver and the attractability of the RCFI program, it's looking like purpose-built rental is most likely. But like I said, the partnership allows for that discussion to kind of happen subsequent to a phase starting development. I would also say that, and this is a huge caveat, there's a servicing agreement, a 300-page document with the City of Vancouver that took multiple years to negotiate, and the City of Vancouver is a big proponent for purpose-built rental. And that's what the service agreement currently entails.
Asked for.
So we would be going back and opening the renegotiation on that if we wanted to.
Don't do that.
3,000 Stratacon units. So
that'll be an intense part of your job period.
It's much easier for the city to sell purpose-built rental. So
and we'll get into the environment side of it. Maybe just talk about the community engagement and how the project kind of flows into the community. Like you've built 11 towers, like you're community building at this stage, right? You're creating a neighborhood. So clearly it's just not 11 towers. There's more thought that goes into how it fits. Maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue from the servicing agreement with the city, because they are very much a stakeholder in the project. There's a fine line between sovereignty versus kind of regulation, and the City of Vancouver has been an excellent partner in the sense that they know it's not their land, but they're acutely aware that their land surrounds the development, and the development is 10.5 acres. So in terms of servicing, that it's going to ultimately fall on the city to provide those services and the development to pay property tax as if it was in the City of Vancouver city limits. So in terms of community building, I already mentioned the transit upgrades the development's going to be taking on the bridge. It's taking on a number of kind of renovating major intersections around the development and making them fully serviced for bike lanes, accessibility, a lot of off-site infrastructure upgrades, storm drains, force water mains, a lot of work kind of going through the immediate region. I know we're in terms of like electrical duct bank upgrades, a lot of these kind of offsite civil planning for the future growth of that neighborhood. The Kitts Point has kind of been an untapped region of not a lot of density in Vancouver. If you look surrounding our site, I think there's one, the Parkview Tower right adjacent to our site. That's about 14 stories maybe, and that's really about it in terms of density.
And how tall are yours?
So in the first phase, we have 39 stories, 29 stories, and
Okay.
26 coming in.
So it'll create that skyline pretty much then for that portion of the city.
Very quickly, yes. We were, again, didn't have to abide by it, but we did accommodate, like, we didn't have to meet the view cones that the rest of the city of Vancouver would be being on Squamish First Nation land. I will say, though, that we might be the first ones through the gate. That region is kind of, like I mentioned, an untapped density that I think is coming. Neighboring to our site, immediately we share property line, about 400-meter property line with them, is the old Molson Brewery, which is now owned by Concord Pacific. So I think, kidding yourself if you're thinking they're not going to be coming through just further on down the road from us. And then as you work your way through False Creek in Vancouver, a lot of that is co-ops that were under leases, 40 years ago, 60 years ago with the city. And some of them have as little as, 18, 15 years left. So there's a lot of uncertainty on what those are going to be, but most of them are 3 stories tall. And Vancouver, as the conference has already highlighted in the very first presentation, it's under an immense housing crisis. So I think there's kind of a lot of pent-up change coming in along the South False Creek. Sanok is just kind of the first one through the gates.
On the ground, what's been the biggest obstacle so far?
I mean, the actual
Yeah.
execution of
Let's get into the
construction?
nitty gritty.
Yeah,
Let's get into the weeds here.
What's the
'Cause that's where you. That's
headaches?
where you reside, right? So
The shape of the site, and because it's not a proper city block, like I mentioned, this was remainder land that CP Rail was looking to sell off, that they had already sold. The
was there
rest
environmental contamination to start with?
littered with it.
Yeah.
There was a lot, and we've had to go through in order, like I mentioned, from the land designation in 2018 to get to breaking ground in 2022 when the Prime Minister came out for the ceremony and the first construction draw was going to be showing up. There was an immense amount of work for construction environmental management plan, for chance find management plan, archaeological assessment, looking at native species of birds and whatnot being relocated in the region. There was a lot of kind of shrubbery and forest that had popped up because nothing had been done on the land for 20 years. So all of this had to go into before construction ever got to commence. But like I said, it's not a city block. It's 10.5 acres with the Broad Street Bridge going smack dead through the middle of it, with Fortis gas line going through the middle of it, and it's awkwardly shaped in between other properties. The entrances we have for construction there's no alleyway running along the backside of the development where you'd put a crane. So everything is serviced from within the development right now, and it is immensely tight for what we're trying to do. I mean, you look at it compared to a downtown site and you go, how are you guys short for space? People build high rises on a quarter city block in downtown, but all of it is serviced from off the site. Your crane is off the site. Your construction trailers might be like on the sidewalk. So I would just say the unique shape of the site and the infrastructure we have surrounding it is what's created the biggest hurdles to date.
How many cranes right now?
3 on site for the first 3 towers, and then we're still in the excavation stage of phase 2, but that'll be an additional 3 cranes going up for the
And
4
where are you
towers.
on those 3 towers?
I think our furthest tower is at level 10 right now, and that's the one that's going to be topping out at 39 stories. And then the second is about on the 3rd story, and the first tower is just getting out of the ground.
Any surprises excavating?
Very dry site. A lot of Vancouver, when you excavate, there's a big water table kind of underneath you, and you just expect to run into that. Being immediately like adjacent to False Creek, it's been a very dry excavation. I will disclose that because we're achieving a very progressive parking standard, you don't need to go down 12 stories in a parkade. So I think a lot of people in the neighborhood were surprised with how quickly we were coming out of the ground. That's because we're only going down to level P3 in the parkade. And,
Well, helps
and
the
it
pro
is,
forma too as well to not have
yeah. No matter where you are, building parking stalls is expensive, and municipalities are actually, I believe that the new BC building code changes that are going through next year are going to actually make it even more requirements on it. So
Even more.
yeah, well, I think in terms of accessibility, in terms of lacking the number of small car spots. So a lot of friends in the industry I have working out in Coquitlam or Burnaby, and kind of what they're seeing on the wall, the writing on the wall. So we were able to avoid a lot of those headaches with
Yeah,
only
it's funny.
going down.
In the GTA in Toronto, it feels like it's going the opposite direction, where there's a sort of more leniency and a more relaxed approach to that. Like the city planners are recognizing it's a huge impediment to development successfully.
So I think that's going in specific pockets in Vancouver. Like you're seeing along the Broadway plan, they mirrored kind of a zero parking requirement, especially if you're building rental housing. It's more of the market. If you're trying to build strata condominium units, people still expect a parking stall to be coming along, or they expect the unit to be priced accordingly, that they're not getting a parking stall. But that is becoming much more common in Vancouver, both from a regulatory standpoint and with the market. You're just seeing less parking on rental projects. But again, that's in specific. You're very close to rapid transit. You're very close to a SkyTrain. That's where you're seeing it.
Yeah, which makes sense. And a location like yours, like sure, you can walk to downtown.
You're across the Broad Street Bridge
Yeah.
from it. Yeah.
Do you have a partner in this one?
Yes, we do. West Bank Development Corporation. I'm sure you guys are familiar with them.
No, who are they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
World-class developer. They have a lot going on in Vancouver, a lot going on in Toronto, projects in Seattle, San Jose, Japan, I believe. So they've been in the industry for a number of years. There was an RFP done for a development partner on Sanok in 2018, I believe. There was a couple shortlisted finalists. West Bank ultimately came in with an attractive proposal and a really strong value alignment. That's something that I think a big takeaway for industry partners, understanding when you're working with a First Nation, and again, there's 630 of them across the country, what Squamish Nation and the hardships they go through on the North Shore versus someone all the way up in Haida Gwaii. Very different story. But West Bank and Ian Gillespie came in with a strong proposal and value alignment in terms of a net zero project, in terms of sharing those values that the nation wants to see. They welcomed the idea of purpose-built rental. That's not something that all developers just see the benefit in building out. Some want their profit up front and they want to be re-exercising that capital. So kind of through an extensive RFP process, West Bank was ultimately selected. Like I said, they weren't formalized. That partnership wasn't formalized until more like 2020. But a big part of that, not only could financing be approved because financing had to come from the entities that were doing the development, and those were partnership entities. You can't create those without a head lease. So there were steps that had to go into place, and it kind of had to be a little touch and go. But ultimately, West Bank's the development partner in the project. They kind of spearheaded the RCFI financing, and part of their job in the partnership, I mean, the nation brought the land in, they were bringing the expertise, they were supposed to bring in competitive market financing, which they did, and that's kind of where we've arrived at today.
So as development manager, you're working with them actively.
Yes. So when you guys were saying, like me, myself being boots on the ground, I work as a development manager, as an owner's rep for Ichikai, and therefore bypass through the nation. West Bank is a development manager on phase 1 and 2 of the project, and that will be the assumption going forward for phases 3 and 4. Their expertise in terms of procurement, in terms of construction management, that's something that we lean on very heavily on the project. This is the first development project that Ichikai has undertaken. You
don't have trade relationships like West Bank does.
There's no way we were ever going to take this on without a development partner. That's not what we were set out to do, and that's not what the Council of Squamish First Nation wanted us to do.
So the long-term vision for this project, 7-8 years from now, you got 11 beautiful rental towers, fully occupied, or maybe longer. I don't know. You tell me your timeline.
I like the timeline you put forward
okay,
there.
yeah.
I would say like phase 1, we're looking to be topping out at about mid 2026, like finishing. I mean, mid 2026, and then the second phase probably another 2 to 3 years after that, and then phase 3 and 4 on kind of a similar spaced out timeline. I will say that like each phase of the development is bringing 1,500 units to market. I think in Vancouver last year, there was something like 2,000 purpose-built rental starts across all of Vancouver. So we're bringing 1,500 online per phase. It's a significant amount, and we're trying to kind of stagger that out while efficiently capture and build as fast as possible.
Well, I mean, this single project will make you a pretty substantial rental player day one in the journey here. So then, is West Bank going to stay in ownership long term in this project, or how does that in the 50-year time horizon, the 100-year time horizon, how does this play out?
Yeah, so West Bank they're a 50-50 partner with the nation and the development, and that's for the life of the development. So it would be a partnership the same way it's a partnership entity that's handling the build out. The partnership is actually Ichikai West. If you go look on the Sanok website, you'll see it. Ichikai West Bank, that's where that comes from. Ichikai West is the partnership. That same partnership would have the opportunity to property manage, asset manage the development going forward for the life of the project. The financing is 50 years through the RCFI program. At that point, the project should be and will be debt free, but then the lease will remain for another 70 years. It's a 120-year head lease. At the end of the head lease, the land and what improvements exist there on the land will go back to the nation, but West Bank will be part of the project for the remaining portion of the head lease.
We're almost out of time here. So one more quick question before we go. What's the next project then? Do you have your sights set on the what you're going to start in 2030 or whenever your time frees up again?
We do actually, and it's been done in a public manner. So about a year, a little over a year ago, the Squamish Nation put a moratorium up on development proposals, and this isn't unique to Squamish in the Metro Vancouver region. A lot of developers have realized that the First Nations have a lot of land there, and land in Vancouver is priced at a point where it's hard to get projects off the ground. So there is just an absurd amount of development proposals coming into various different First Nations. So the Squamish Nation put a moratorium on it, and no development proposals for a year's time to undergo some land use planning on their high proximity urban center sites. So the nation kicked that off and put together a consultant team for land use planning on two of their North Shore reserves, and one in Squamish Valley, and then one actually on one of the Gulf Islands that they have just south of Gibsons in BC. So that land use planning has been going on for a little over a year now. Following from that is a recommendation on what the next steps would look like and where kind of resources should be focused. So I think it kind of goes without saying that the nation has a large land holding on the North Shore. The North Shore is experiencing a very similar real estate market as to City of Vancouver proper. It's really across the whole region there in Metro Vancouver. So I think that'll kind of be the next steps, is taking that land use planning and figuring out what initiatives and what kind of projects want to be put on the focus in the short term.
Feels like you're having a lot of fun.
I'm enjoying it. In all honesty, when I was at BC Housing, my current boss, I worked with her in the nonprofit sector for a little while, and I used to always pick her brain about Sanok. I was always interested in what's going on with like the MST file in Vancouver. Just being someone who's Indigenous, and I studied real estate and economics, it was kind of a dream come true when I got the chance to join Ichikai and to work on Sanok. It's exactly where I want to be. I know when I was in school, I had an inclination I wanted to work with First Nations and kind of help Indigenous people. That being said, the opportunities to do so seemed a lot like it was go work for the government, and you kind of get put in the spin cycle of working for a large organization, kind of feel like you're, I don't want to say lacking meaning in what you're doing, but you just kind of get caught up in that and the bureaucracy. So being able to work for a First Nation while working for their for-profit economic development arm, I really like it. It moves at the speed of the industry. It moves at a competitive business flow speed. And I really appreciate that, while at the same time working for something that I'm passionate about and I care about.
Yeah, I mean, the sense of pride of seeing a landmark development like that's going to change, the outcome for generations for First Nations must be just a great feeling to get up in the morning and do that.
Absolutely, it's I think it's amazing. I'm just also being like a Vancouver resident, knowing that in 30 years from now, I'll drive by that site and be able to see it.
Hey, kids, your
exactly.
grandkids,
Very excited for that.
Grandpappy built that.
Yeah. And then also knowing that, this is a project that's really helping the nation. Like, I'm not a member of the Squamish First Nation, but for that group of people, it's going to help provide economic independence and stability for them for the next 120 years. That's something you can take a lot of pride in as well. So.
We're at a time here at the Western Canada Apartment Investment Conference, but I do want to thank you, Trevor, for joining us today. That was interesting, without a doubt. I do a fair bit of business out in the BC market, so I'm not unfamiliar with that kind of development. But this was a great insight, and appreciate you sharing your thoughts today. I want to thank, of course, First National for powering the podcast, and for the Real Estate Forums for hosting us here at the conference. Thanks again, Trevor.
Thank you very much, guys.